Welcome to the Plato Paradigm, a paradigm shift in reading Plato's dialogues, episode 48, Euthyphro 9a to b. Socrates and Euthyphro have agreed that the gods are not in dispute over justice itself, but over which actions are just and which people are just. And to make the point, Socrates has just asked Euthyphro to teach him, as a sophist would teach, so that Socrates would be more of an expert on this sort of thing for his trial, what evidence Euthyphro has that all the gods think that that man was murdered unjustly. Now, when he talks about that man, he's talking about Euthyphro's labourer who had killed one of his father's household. Why should all the gods consider this or that person to have been killed unjustly? Hosan thetiuon androphonos genomenos sundethesu potu despotu tu apothonontos, phthase telutes astiata desma, printon sundes anta paraton exegeton, periautu puthestai tichrei poien, kai hupertu toiutu de orthos eche epexienai kai episceptestai phonu ton huon to patri. Why should all the gods think that that man was killed unjustly, who would become a manslayer while labouring? I say he would become, as an attempt to translate the Greek word here, which is thrown in to generalize the instance. Socrates is not talking specifically about Euthyphro's case, but using the case as an example of the sort of case where you would suppose that the gods would be in dispute over the details, who really is just or unjust. This is the sort of case which is really, really complex. Having been bound by the master of the murdered man, died before his time because of the bonds, before the one who bound him could learn what to do with him from the religious interpreters. And we know that they're in Athens, and this is the big problem here. Naxos is so far away from Athens that it's now impossible just to send someone to ask the interpreters what to do and expect an answer before someone dies. And no, they couldn't feed the man because that would spread the miasma. He was specifically isolated in a ditch because he had miasma. This isn't said in the dialogue, but it's obvious. This is why Euthyphro is prosecuting his father at all. He doesn't want to eat or drink with someone who has miasma. Euthyphro's father would have the same attitude, which is why he wouldn't want to eat or drink with this man who murdered one of his household. Actually, Euthyphro's father is giving the murderer the benefit of the doubt because he hasn't decided on his own account that this man killed unjustly. It isn't stated, but I think it's very unlikely that Euthyphro himself sent to the interpreters to find out what to do about his father. Socrates hasn't finished yet. And why should all the gods think that it is right for a son to prosecute and denounce his father for murder on behalf of such a man? Apart from anything else, we see here the excellent memory of Socrates, who sums up what Euthyphro had told him without missing any of the details or getting them wrong, but also generalizing in a way because he doesn't mention Naxos. He doesn't say that the one who bound was the father of Euthyphro, and we don't get any prurient details of the murder itself. Euthyphro doesn't answer, and so Socrates carries on. Ithi, perituton pero timois ephes endexastai, hos pantos malon, pantes theoi heguntai orthos echin tautenten praxin. Come, about these things, try to show me something clear that above all the gods think that this action is correct. Again, Euthyphro doesn't answer. So Socrates carries on. Kan moi hikanos endexe, enkomi adzon se epi sophia udepote pausomai. And if you show me sufficiently, I shall never stop praising you for Sophia, for expertise, not necessarily for wisdom. Socrates has clearly said all he can say on this point, so Euthyphro has to say something. Al issos uk oligon ergon estino Socrates, epei panuges aphos echoimi an epidexaisoi. But perhaps it's no small task, Socrates, since I would be able to show you quite clearly. This is obviously a delaying tactic, or even worse, an avoidance tactic. Euthyphro has no intention of explaining why all the gods should think this to be unjust. There's no reason why Euthyphro would complicate his case in court. The complexities of the case depend on an interpretation of laws and have nothing to do with the gods. The only reason that Euthyphro brought up the gods in the first place was that he was defending his own action in prosecuting his father, and he pointed out that this is what Zeus did, and Zeus is considered to be the most just of the gods. Since he's already been using this argument against his family in a family squabble before the case, this will probably arise in the case as well, because the father will have to defend himself and he will attack Euthyphro. What would not arise in a court case is precisely what Socrates is asking about now. What is to hosion, the holy? It's even less likely in a court case that they would ever come to the problem what causes gods to have disputes among themselves, or that the gods would disagree over who is just or unjust. The court case should and probably will centre on the facts of the matter to decide whether Euthyphro's father acted justly or unjustly. And either way, the decision of the court will remove the miasma. This is the whole point of the trial. Euthyphro has taken his father to court because he believes that there is miasma. Socrates has been confusing the issue with questions like, what is to hosion? And by connecting gods with justice, the idea that the gods love justice and yet they can't agree among themselves which acts are just, which acts are unjust. This has made the whole discussion here turn upon the gods, when actually the gods are not involved in the case itself. Euthyphro has just tried to avoid the conversation by saying it's too complicated to explain to Socrates. He'll be able to do it in the court case. Socrates doesn't leave it, but carries on pushing. Manthano, hotisoi doko ton dikastondus methestros enai, epe ekenoiske endexedelon hotihos adikatek estin kai hoitheoi hapantes tatoi alta misusin. Panuges aphos, O Socrates, e anper akuo siger mu legontos. I understand I seem to you to be someone who finds it harder to learn than the judges, since you will indicate to each of them clearly that these things are unjust and that the gods, all of them, hate such things. Quite clearly, Socrates, if they hear me speaking. Socrates raises a good point that if Euthyphro thinks that it will take too long to explain to Socrates now, just one person, How is he going to have the time to speak to each one of the judges to make them understand, given that speeches are strictly limited? The whole case has to be over within a day. Socrates presents Euthyphro as if he will accomplish this task in his allotted time, which means that the only other reason Euthyphro could possibly have for not teaching Socrates now is that Socrates must be really stupid compared to the judges. Now, the judges are ordinary Athenians. They have been chosen for the day to be jurors. The main difference between Socrates and most other Athenian citizens with regard to the law courts is that they are easily influenced by rhetoric, while Socrates keeps asking questions. And Euthyphro is not unaware of this, and in any case, the law courts allow speeches. The prosecutor and the defendant will give speeches, during which there is no need for cross-examination, although that can happen if they want it. We have an example of this in Plato's Apologia, the dialogue which purportedly records Socrates' 3 speeches which he gave in his case where he's defending against Meletus. During the first speech, Socrates calls Meletus and cross-examines him. We might think that Meletus doesn't come out of it very well, but I'm not so sure that the judges thought that. Euthyphro is so confident in his rhetorical ability that he is confident that he will be able to influence the judges, whatever the case may be, and he's so confident that he doesn't really listen to what Socrates is saying. Socrates here suggests that it will be easy for him to indicate to them that these things are unjust. But what things were unjust? The murder was unjust, and that is all. All of the other events are the background to the murder. I say murder because this is what Euthyphro is prosecuting his father for. But in fact, if we look at the events, even in the way that Euthyphro described them, it would seem that Euthyphro's father did just what Euthyphro himself would have done in similar circumstances. Or maybe not, because Euthyphro seems to be such an expert that he doesn't need to ask the religious interpreters in Athens what to do when there is a death. He seems to think that he is the expert. This is because he is an expert on mythology. When it comes to the law court, he thinks that his rhetoric will win the day, and it's interesting that Socrates has spent so much time connecting to hosion, the holy, with justice.